This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. This week, our guest is Barbara Bestor.
Barbara is the founder and principal of Bestor Architecture, an architecture office in Los Angeles.
Yes, and with her we talk about what?
Architecture.
Architecture. Her upbringing, how she got into architecture, her studying it, and then very quickly we move into her practice and her approach, and a very significant transition point in her life when she sort of, how do I say this? When her design approach became solidified, I guess, and changed. And so the work you see now is kind of the work that's a result of that pivotal moment in her life. So she talks about that. She talks about her approach to design, layering in design, conceptual thinking in design versus execution, languages of architecture, all these things. Fun conversation. You guys are going to enjoy it for sure. Sponsors.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of The Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in our episode notes.
We are supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool for the AEC industry. It's also a program that we use in our office. And why do we like it? Well, it's a plugin and not a separate application, which means we can work natively in our modeling programs such as Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. It's easy and versatile. We've used many other rendering programs, and many are just way too difficult to use. With Enscape, it's easy to create renderings, 360 panoramas and videos, and immersive VR experiences. It also renders in real time, so you can see the light, shadows, and material as you're working. So start your free trial today by clicking the Enscape 3D link in our show notes. If you're starting to laser scan your renovation projects for accurate as-builts, a client at some point has probably handed you some wonky CAD drawings from 17 years ago. Enter Integrated Projects, or IPX for short. IPX is a scan-to-BIM platform that converts your 3D point cloud file from any major LiDAR camera into standardized BIM and CAD files. The best part is that their website lays out the price and turnaround time instantly. Start that interior renovation project on the 50-yard line with accurate drawings in 3D and 2D. Click the IPX link in our show notes to get your first instant quote.
This is The Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Barbara. Here we go.
I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Boston adjacent. My dad was a grad student in anthropology at Harvard, and my mom had recently emigrated to marry him and already had some graduate degrees in, I think, French and German or something. And was teaching at, I think, a women's college, teaching language in Cambridge when I was born. So a very academic, I would say impoverished academia would be my background from childhood.
Gotcha.
We lived in a little apartment on a nice, like a street that had a lot of kids. So that was really fun. We had there was a dead end street near me called Appleton Road. And we had the Appleton Road gang, which was more like summers and stuff, bunch of kids to play with. But it's a kind of town where you took a bus everywhere. Like nobody had, well, I'm sure some people had cars, but nobody I know had cars really. I guess, no, I take it back. we did have a car, but we didn't really use it very much because I just grew up with public transportation and riding my bike to school, and even in the winter and stuff.
I mean, well, Cambridge is really close to Boston. It's it's right next to it. So getting around without a car is pretty feasible.
Yeah. Yeah. I still kind of, I miss that sometimes. I've been in LA for a really long time, but I did like the ease of living in a town like that, especially when my kids were teenagers, but not old enough to drive yet. I had so much freedom as a kid to be able to go anywhere. Even like at night, I think we all had fake IDs in high school and would go to see bands in Boston and just take the train. Back. It's like no big deal.
Yeah, LA is a little more difficult to do if you don't have a license. Oh, I guess there's Uber and stuff now, but still, it's not the same thing. There's not the freedom.
Well, and it is the city for the car. So bicycling is pretty dangerous here. A very good family friend just got hit and run and died as a pedestrian in Australia. Like it's just really
Oh
right
no.
now. This week I'm like very upset about the aspects of our city that are so much
Yeah.
about being shaped by the car.
So grew up in Cambridge. Father was an anthropologist or taught in that space, right? So academic family.
I would say
Was
perpetual graduate student would be more my father, but eventually a professor. Yes,
Yeah, well,
took a
it's funny. I
while.
find that a lot of grad students end up in that situation. They get sucked into, not that it's a bad thing either. They get sucked into their thesis. Yeah, it lasts 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and it just kind of keeps going. It's a very, I don't know. It's an interesting life if you think about it.
I know.
Yeah. Did
Yeah, I also.
Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was like, I like the schedule. I really like the academic schedule. I mean, I taught for a long time too, and in my mind or my whole almost body is still oriented a little bit to, September to May is
Yeah.
the work year, and then you kind of do stuff that's not work,
Yeah.
but it's work, but like research and other creative things in the summer. So I try to at least take August off or something like that now to keep the flame alive.
That's a very European thing to do.
It's hard, man. Yeah, America is
Yeah.
not set up for that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, we're really not. That's an interesting thing. It's a 24/7 or 5, 6 day a week grind, just endless. You get 10 days for vacation. It's like snippets of things here and there, and there's not really the mentality of. Now, this is a tangent, but I was speaking with an Italian architect recently, and I was saying to him, we were possibly going to work on something together, and I said, "Oh, I'm actually going to be out of town, starting next week for 10 days," which was a big deal for me because again, I don't take time off. And he's like, only 10 days? And this was in December. I'm like, yeah, 10 days is an eternity for us. He's like, and he was so perplexed. You could see on his face. He was shocked and confused. He didn't comprehend as to why 10 days would be considered a long time. He's like, no.
Yeah.
That's not enough time. That's not enough time. Well, different, I guess.
I have a friend who's been teaching at USC, and he almost every year, takes a group of students to Barcelona in the fall, and they go for a pretty long time. And it's great because they're doing a studio, but they're doing research. They're visiting all kinds of amazing buildings. He essentially has, built into his year this kind of month of, being in a wonderful other kind of a city and doing research and working with students. I was like, that's a good setup. I mean, that's one way to do it anyhow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of like do studios that are involved, going somewhere else for a big chunk of time. But in regular work, I mean, I work a lot, but I find luckily a lot of my different client groups also are kind of gone in August, so I don't have to be as physically present to things. So I can do some Zooms here and there, but trying to. It was like Maxine Waters, reclaiming my time. I'm like, I really do need some time to not be working. Otherwise, like the fun of it all, can recede. So
Yeah, no, there's a threshold that exists for sure. So when you were a kid growing up in Cambridge, were you exposed to, or when did architecture become this thing that you knew you were going to, study and do? Because you have if I'm not mistaken, you have a bachelor's and a master's, right? So
I don't have a bachelor's. I was an art major as an undergrad, but I knew I was going to do architecture since I think 8th grade. I think it was in my yearbook in 8th grade. Yeah, long term. I fooled around with chemistry, in 6th grade and 7th grade, and then switched to architecture. But really, I would say Cambridge used to have, it probably still does have a pretty large amount of architects per square foot, more academics and then second, maybe architects. Now it's probably all different, like biotech or something, but back in the day, and this would be like the 70s. And I, as a babysat, I really did have to I had to buy my own clothes and stuff like that from when I was very little. So I always had jobs, and I babysat a lot when I was maybe 11 and 12. And somehow a couple of those clients were architects, and then also a couple friends of mine's parents were architects. And in Cambridge in the 70s, like the jam was that you'd have like an old, house from the 19th century and then do a kind of modern 70s super graphic, something like that, interior renovation. That's what most of the architects did, and they were so cool.
That sounds
I'm
cool.
still like excited about them because they're so great. It was such a fun, exuberant time. At the same time, like design research started, with Benjamin. Oh my gosh, what's his name? Yeah, the guy who started that. His partners, Benjamin Thomas. Ben Thomas. He did all the festival marketplaces later with Rouse Development. But he, like the design research store which sold Marimekko and whatnot, was in a remodeled, modernist remodel of a Victorian storefront, and then later it became like a beautiful brutalist building that's right in Harvard Square. I think now it's a Crate and Barrel or something. But that idea of I would say even the palimpsestic nature of that, like the layering of a different interpretation of the inside. Like I think that was somehow it really got me. And then I would read architecture books late at night. Like when I was babysitting in those days, you'd watch, I think, Love Boat, and then it was Fantasy Island on Saturday night. And then, that was till like 10 or 11, and then you'd come home at like 2. So I had a couple hours and just read architecture books. So I remember reading like what is it called? The 10 or whatever, the one that Johnson put together with Meyer and Gwathmey and stuff, because that would have kind of come out around, like I'd be later in the 70s or 80s, but it was, those books are from the early 70s.
Gotcha, yeah.
So I actually kind of got to understand. I just liked all the stuff about it.
Interesting.
And I interned for an architecture firm when I was in high school, and at Cambridge 7, actually, because I loved the aquarium in Boston. So I got an internship there, and I think I organized their slide library or something like that. But it definitely exposed me to the, workspace of architecture. And I did career disco at the GST when I was after my junior year in high school, and that sealed the deal. So I mean, that's what I wanted to do. So their summer programs, I got a scholarship to go to that.
Wow.
I was like, I'm in.
So okay, so it was quite clear in a sense. And actually I think compared to a lot of people, you probably had a pretty legitimate understanding of what architecture was about and what architects are like. Because I do find that for a lot of people, especially kids, I mean, they're just kids, but a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions about architects. They think we're engineers, or they think we're kind of defined in a bunch of different ways. But given where you grew up and those people, I'm going to guess you had a pretty good sense of like what you were getting into. So when in high school and you went to college, you were studying architecture, but technically it was a Bachelor of Arts. Was that the case?
Well, no, I was studying art. I went to Harvard undergrad, and I majored in visual environmental studies, and I was really into film. I guess I because I came from this academic family, I really believed in grad school, so I knew I was going to go to grad school, and so I would take seminars, mostly like in art history, that were about architecture, but my major was more studio art. And I did paintings for my thesis. I was kind of thinking about being a painter for a while after college before I went to grad school, but I did do this pretty transformative year where I went to the AA for a year. I got my scholarship, my college scholarship. They applied the money to go to AA, which was more than the AA cost. So I was able to afford to live there and go to the AA and travel back to the US actually in the winter. I got an internship at Orpheus for the following summer because I was out here in the winter. Like it was like 85, 86. So
oh, cool.
But the AA was really influential in terms of, being like really getting closer to where the cutting edge was for experimental architectural ideas. And, Koolhaas was lecturing, Zaha had a show while I was there. There's a lot of, I do a lot of theory actually in college, I gotta say, like semiotics and whatnot. And there's like good theory people teaching there. And really great. My favorite studio was a group that included Peter St. John from Caruso St. John and Matthias Sauerbruch from Sauerbruch Hutton. They were two of the three folks that taught the studio I took for most of that year. And they were really great. They were really creative, creative drawings and design ideas. Peter Wilson was a big influence in the school at that time. But also when I was there, Alvin Boyarsky, like after, he was like, you should stay here, don't go back. I was like, I gotta for school like this. And he's like, well, if you're gonna go anywhere in the US, do not stay on the East Coast for grad school. You gotta go to SciArc in LA. I was like, what's that? And so then I ended up checking it out.
So when did you study at the AA? Was that like your third or fourth year in college? Something like that?
Junior year, yeah. So 85, 86.
And that was it sounds like maybe your first time and your first dose of architecture studio and heavy architecture theory.
Wow.
Yes. Well, architecture theory I'd actually been doing already in college because those were the classes I could get into at the GSD. But
gotcha.
it was in the French department actually, was the real theory, not at the architecture school at that point. It was way back. But but no, I think that the studio part, I had, career discovery is not a bad one, even though summer programs give you a glimpse of the all-nighters. The AA was a European school, so it wasn't quite as intense in that sense that you're cranking for your projects, but you worked at home and then we're at the school to for days doing pinups and going to other people's reviews and stuff. But I would say it was a more livable, form of exposure. It was very emphasis was really on the creative, and a lot of our projects were like we would make full scale pieces and bring them out to the southern coast of England to photograph in the site. It's really fun.
That's
the one thing I regret is the winter part. I decided not to do the trip that my studio was doing, which was going to the Alhambra in Granada, and instead flew back to LA, which was good because I got my internship at Morpheus when I was there. But I only went to the Granada to the Alhambra just last spring, and oh my god, I feel like that should be mandatory for every architecture student to go there. It's so incredible. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, I just wasted my life. I should have been to the Alhambra doing landscape integrated with architecture back in the day. But anyhow, yeah. So I love education in general. Like I'd be thrilled if I was just still in grad school for something. But luckily, I like architecture enough that I don't want to leave it.
So that's an interesting topic in itself, because a lot of folks who become architects, they first go to school, either undergrad or grad, and study architecture. And that's, for a lot of people, where the passion really forms. And part of it has to do with the culture of the studio. And you make close friends there and all of that kind of stuff. But what I'm getting at is I do find that there's a lot of people who love academia and love studying and love the theory and love being in that environment, which I did as well. And then they decide to teach, let's say teach part-time and also have a practice. And that's really, really difficult to do. And I would say, from what I've seen, not many people end up doing it successfully, because I think it's very easy to underestimate how much teaching takes from a person. But it sounds like in your career, you started teaching pretty early on, and you taught for a long time, and you have a very successful practice. So somehow you managed to do both well. And I don't know if I have a question really, but I just think it's interesting to come across a practitioner who's, again, very successful in that space, but also adores the teaching realm and studying and all those things, and did it. So I don't know, can you just talk about how you balance those two, or how did you decide to also have a practice and as opposed to just staying in academia, which is very, very tempting, I think, for a lot of architects?
Well, I think pretty early on, I did have a job right after grad school at like a bigger, I don't know why I took it, like a bigger corporate firm, like the people who had done the gas company tower, because I thought that I tried to get a job at Gary's. I did get an interview, and then I worked at the gas company tower company for pretty briefly, because it was sort of a Texan-run skyscraper company, and it was not my jam really, and it was all run by guys who went to the same frat at Texas A&M. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is not my life. But I had been getting I started doing all these little side projects for people. I actually had done some projects even in grad school because partially because I guess I'm a pretty gregarious person, so I always have tried to have, not tried to, but I just have a lot of friends and acquaintances who aren't in architecture, and that is very useful if you're trying to have a practice. So I had all these jobs where I was designing and sometimes building like furniture for people like film writers and TV writers' home offices. So I was very inspired by Pierre Chareau, and I did a couple, I did all these things. So, and some of the summer jobs I'd had in college, like one of the people I worked for a lot was Norman Millar, who was also teaching part time. But I was offered a project. Well, I wasn't offered, I was asked to interview with some people who had tried to hire a friend of mine who was not an architect to essentially design like something between like a castle and Batman's lair in the Palisades. And my friend, who was this creative person who built this, he actually built like all this stuff in the grotto at the Harvard Lampoon Underground, and was, was this great design person, but not trained in architecture or anything. And he's like, well, I can't really do that, but you should talk to Barbara. She just graduated. And so I had this interview, and I asked Norman if he would come do it with me, because maybe we could get this project, and then we could have a project together. And he did, and we got it. So we did this house for this wonderful couple of my first clients, still friends with them. And it kind of ended up being more like Gamble House meets Schindler House instead of Castle meets Batman's Cave. But there was, there was like a pole. And they had to study from like the balcony down, like a bat pole, and a couple of things. They had some pretty cool collections of, Comic-Con type stuff. Oh. And anyhow, so we ended up kind of putting up a shingle together as not as a partnership, but as a joint venture. And we did a couple more projects together as a joint venture, but that was what let me quit the job at the skyscraper place and then teach and do that house. And then we also did a theater for the Actors Gang. We did a couple things together, and I got littler projects, but I was pretty much always doing little projects while teaching. And I would say that this is in the 90s. Somehow from like, let's say the 70s to now, the idea that if you're adjunct design faculty, you're just going and doing studio a couple days a week and like you're out, somehow it's morphed into like, oh, now you have to go to 10 faculty meetings and do yada yada. And like you can't do that and have a practice. You can do, if you have a small practice, you can, or at least you could, I mean, I don't know what the economics are right now, but you could do like a studio and the rest of the time you're working. And I think I ended up with like 3 employees, and I was still teaching until about 2001. And then a bunch of stuff happened in my life. Like I got divorced and I moved back. And then I was like, fuck this. I'm not doing any of this stuff anymore. I was like, I literally was going to do an application to UCLA art grad school and do mixed media. I was like,
whoa. Big shift.
I was pissed. I was really pissed. My marriage, I was pissed. I was like, this is, I thought I knew what I was doing and everything sucks. And I was like, fuck it. But then in the course of that, I rebuilt this shack in Echo Park, because I was a single mom suddenly with 2 kids, and very young kids, like 2 and 3. And I built this thing, and then that weirdly got published a lot. And then everything kind of changed. So it was, but one of the reasons I think it got published is that it was kind of like funner and unconscious, the project. Like it wasn't what I had been doing, which was very thoughtful, theoretically informed high modernism or neo-modernism, I guess, because that was our era. And it was just weird. It was like a little weirder, and it had some vernacular elements and some other stuff. So much more like my unconscious suddenly came out at age, 36 or something, which is not a minute too soon, because then I kind of like started to get more and more work. Well, I started a lot of work because of that, and I got a book deal and all kinds of stuff. So it was an interesting time. But I guess I would say in general, the teaching thing has to do with how the academy treats it too, that if you want people who are working and teaching, which I do think is a really good ethos. I feel like I'm not I'm not super pumped about the people who only teaching, being everyone teaching in architecture school. That was never how it was before.
Hmm.
And I think it's tricky because a couple generations of that, you get pretty far away from the built environment aspect. Not that you need people to teach you waterproofing details or anything, but I think it's a good
Well,
balance of, like
Yeah.
how do you like to be a creative architect, you still have to want to build buildings,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that's, I mean, not exclusively, certainly you could be a creative paper architect or digital, but in general, the jobs for the graduates are not, in the paper digital department, they're more
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And
building department. So
yeah, it's a good point, and I agree with it. And I like what you said. It only takes I think you said a few generations before academia and that space gets more and more siloed and kind of into their own rabbit hole. And personally, I feel like we're probably at that point now. It's very strange, and it's just hard. And I don't even necessarily blame the part-time faculty and teachers, some of them who are friends of mine, because there's no time. Like you
oh
said,
no,
the
it's not.
commitments.
Yeah, yeah, it's not. It's a structural,
Yeah.
late capitalist issue, not
Yeah,
not has
yeah,
anything to do
yeah,
with the poor people involved in it. It's just that's what you have to do. At the same time, our museums don't have architecture critics anymore. Our newspapers don't have architecture
Yeah.
critics. Like where the discourse of the built environment is so important. And I actually think the next generations are finding ways to revive it and through non-institutional manners. It will probably end up becoming the new institutional manners. But
Hmm.
I also think the economics right now of architecture schools, it's become so expensive suddenly that, it's a little bit of that's a shooting yourself in the foot thing too from a cost, the cost of the professional school.
Yeah.
I'm on the board of SciArc, which I love, and I love a lot of the schools and stuff like that. But I was like, realistically, everybody should go to a
Community
community college
college.
for two
Yeah.
years and then
Yeah.
try to get into Cal State something, and
Yeah.
like that's the only affordable way to do it right now.
Yeah.
And that I think is obscene. Like it makes no sense. So
Yeah. I agree. They're tough issues. And then also, of course, you in the last recent generations, you do undergrad, then maybe you do grad because you need to have a graduate degree to teach, and then you teach part-time, and then you're in student debt for like 20 years while making no money teaching part-time. It's just a brutal situation to be in. But let me ask, so you finished teaching in 2001. Do you have any interest to resume teaching?
oh, I had my Godfather 2 moment in 2008 when I started
When,
back in. So
yeah.
that was like there was a recession
Yeah.
suddenly, and Norman, who by then had been the dean at Woodbury for a long time, was starting a graduate program, and the person who had been pegged to be the head of the graduate program decided not to do it. So I got asked in the summer, like, would I be willing to be the incoming founding chair of this graduate program at Woodbury?
Mm.
And I was like, yes, I will.
Yeah.
For many reasons, because A, I missed teaching, and B, it was 2008.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, I don't know what's going to be out there.
Yeah.
And I had 2 kids in school and everything. So I started doing that. And that was actually amazing because, it was the first year we had,
Those things are not one to stay in.
I know. They're my friend Sunny Lamb who works with me, and like I think our ears have a different shape. But it was so great because I had 6 students of the incoming class, and then the second, and then my job was to get more students to come, but also to set this curriculum. I got to really work on the pedagogy, and
Cool.
we started a thing where every incoming grad student in the first year they had a course that they had to take, which is something that had been around at SciArc, and I think it was at UCLA before that, where it was called, I think, Seeing LA, and we would go and look at things from, historic buildings, but also like the port of LA and how the landfill works, or the oil production in LA, and like go around Baldwin Hills and just really getting a sense of how the city worked. And this is 2008, 9, so digital world, but not fully,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
couldn't just surf the Google Maps at that point for seeing stuff. So, but
Yeah.
I, I'm a big believer in experience and experiencing space and stuff. So I would teach that class always, and then I sometimes teach studio as well. And I was a thesis. I had a lot of thesis students, and actually a lot of the people from my tenure there. I think I was there for 4, 5 years in
Oh,
that
okay.
school, and a lot of my senior people at the office were my grad students there. I'd say I have like 6 or something.
Wow.
So I trained and and they kind of run the show right here.
That's
But yeah,
funny.
so that was really wonderful. But it was also like after as I started to get some bigger projects, maybe 4 or 5 years later, and then I think I started doing like Beats by Dre and
Hmm.
um, maybe even like Snapchat, and then suddenly it started to get too hectic, so I had to stop teaching. I think I taught thesis prep for another year or two, and then just stopped altogether. But I would like to again at some point. I really like these because I
Yeah.
like working with people and their
Yeah.
idea, but also
Yeah.
how to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think thesis is fun because you really start to work with, well, one, slightly more mature people as opposed to, let's say, first year
Yeah.
undergrads, which are also fun to teach. But then everyone has, like you said, their own ideas. And it's really exciting to kind of, you almost get to live sort of vicariously through someone else's minds and projects in that kind of space, I think. I taught briefly at Woodbury, so I probably know some of the people that you taught, in fact.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. um,
Well,
so
yeah, and I think it's that I mean the thing I love, oh my gosh, about being an architect. Sorry, it's
Those
like
things are alive.
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's like those things in that movie Totoro, like the little black
yeah, yeah, yeah,
things. They're
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's like they're just like popping out of my ears. Um I think what I like about being an architect and why I really like clients too is like I just love this sort of creative and like I'm pretty good at bringing other like a deeper set of references or bench things to the table, but I'm not as like I kind of I think that the framing of a problem or the framing of a in a case of thesis like a creative thing that you're trying to have many different um, creating something that different people have different readings of. So
Mm,
like so just getting an interesting problem set together and then figuring out a way to do it. I think that's just very exciting. And that's what I get to do in my regular life. And that's
yeah,
also like I think, what sometimes working with the people in my studio, I think it's a lot the same. Like it's
yeah,
like we have a bunch of little thesis projects. They're not as like
Yeah.
deep necessarily or wildly, speculative as a thesis project might be, but it's not a dissimilar act.
well, I like that idea because I do think that offices practice in very different ways, obviously, but a fair amount of architecture offices tend to be a bit more restrained or not think of it as that kind of setting or space. The studio, I mean, it's more like we have our style, we have our
Just repetitive.
process, and your job is to kind of conform and execute what the directors want you to execute and be their extension of them, which there's always some of that inherent in any practice, I think. But yeah, what you're saying, you're thinking about it a bit more of like a studio. I mean, an academic space in a sense, where there's more openness to different ideas and stuff sounds more fun, to be honest.
Well, I hope it's that way. I mean, now as you say that, I'm like, I don't. Does everybody here feel that way? I might be like a total autocrat for all I know. Like I'm just trying, I'm trying to have creative conversations. I think it's yeah, but I think that again, it's for the people the colleagues here, but also for the client. I think they
Yeah,
do. They bring the thing, and sometimes it's like I don't know, just do whatever you want to do with that. I mean, it barely ever happens, as you can imagine.
yeah,
And that's harder, frankly.
Yeah.
Like if there's no
yeah,
constraints, it's hard for us architects. We like some rules, some
Yeah.
sand in the oyster, to kind
yeah.
of
Make
come
the
up with
pearl.
some
Yeah,
new, like, well, what if, yeah, like I think that's really important. Um, but yeah, I hope we try. I mean, one thing I would say that it's not just me really, because I'm kind of doing my thing, but like like my friend Carrie, who's the COO, and Kate and Annie, like we really try to have like a good office culture. Like that's one of the like office environment, office culture that is, you know, making it a good, nice place to be doing architecture. And I try to take some projects that are, some of our projects are definitely not making a penny, but are just good for the general creative output and like trying new things. Sometimes you have to do that because it's not like every project brings with it like zillions of creative opportunities.
Yeah. I want to go back to the thing you mentioned when you were kind of like talking about the shift that happened in your personal life and your career.
The fuck it point.
And yeah, because
I'm still mad at you.
But it's interesting because you said that the way you kind of worked on your house at that time, like you just made it more fun. Maybe it was just more you. And it made me wonder, what do you think was holding you up in the creative work that you were doing before that point?
Well, I definitely came from a very theory-informed, obsessive architecting background. I feel like I'm sure I wouldn't have felt safe. Like I loved like early Gary and early Marxists and stuff like that, but I wouldn't have felt quite comfortable doing that yet at the time when I started. Like I was a little more, like neo-modernism had kind of taken hold more by the 90s. And so it's like that weird, bits of OMA and translucency, not transparency, thing, framing things. But it was easier. I mean, I had done one house, maybe two houses before this happened, and a lot of different, adaptive reuse or different kinds of things. Really, again, informed. Like I did a lot more interior furniture, built-in things and stuff. I guess it was a shift away from ideology informed by theory to a more expressive, playful place. I mean that, and in a way, I would say my daughters, of technically my clients, because this is making a house for us, was like their the kind of stuff they liked. Like one of them would only wear stripes, the other one loved pink. Like I was like, let's just go for it. Let's fucking put pink everywhere. I was like, I hated pink, but I was like, I like white and black and navy, maybe more navy. But but I just kind of was like, let's just do it. And it did have a lot of, there's a lot of stuff about that house, which is in the book I did later called Bohemian Modern Living. It's sort of like I have Mary Meckle curtains, or like I have stuff. I just sort of was raiding my own childhood store of things, and a lot of the art I liked. When I was painting and stuff, I liked anything from like Paul Klee to David Sally, and I think there was a certain Jungian aspect. The house, the shack that I bought was like had a strong gabled roof, and I had thought originally about like wrapping it in mirror glass and doing this whole bunch of all these different models of what I was going to do with it. But it was just a creative playground. And I didn't have a real contractor. I hired like a kind of like literally a ragtag band of like one contractor I'd done a lot of like stores with, and then some people who lived across the street who needed a job. Just it was funny. And the permits were like, I think I just pulled everything on e-permit, as remodel windows or whatever. Just completely huge remodel, which is done in this ridiculous accretional way with random permits. But at that time, you could kind of get away with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I was spending a lot of like I would spend my Tuesday nights or Monday nights at Le Deux Cafe, like having a bottle of wine and being mad about my divorce with people. So I really wanted the garden at Le Deux Cafe, which I don't know if you remember, like, it was off in Hollywood. Like you entered off this parking lot. It's really great, like olive trees and kind of raised pond outdoor seating. There wasn't really anything else like that in LA. Later it was like Ashe was kind of like that, I think, in Mass. But so I was like, I built something like that. It was just a thing. But it was really fun and playful. And then because that ended up being the thing that did, get published, like it was in the New York Times and stuff, then that it kind of just opened up the possibilities like so much more about what one can do even in the practice of like, a pretty modest house environment, and including interior and including super graphics, which I always loved.
Graphics, yeah.
I still love. So I kind of, so after that, things loosened up a lot. Also my career grew a lot. But it was funny because I basically had to shed off some of the the schooling I had had
Yeah.
and ideological, like, because it's still so trendy. I mean, now, like, you probably have to do like mission revival to be cool if you're teaching right now, or you're like, who knows? I like all the radical Pomo stuff, but like, it's just sort of, there's a thing going on when you're in school. So,
Yeah.
it was just like, I was able to just be done with that and just do whatever, use my own weird bag of things that I like to apply to projects.
It's interesting because I feel like sometimes architects lose the fun of the creative process because we're trying to be too rational and too constrained. I also feel like there is, like, I love colors and playfulness, but I'm also very rational. So I do struggle with both sides quite often, I have to say. And there is also, I feel like, kind of like if you go too far onto the other side, like the playful side, maybe you feel like you're not an architect anymore because it's not what people are expecting you to be doing. Therefore, are you an interior designer? Are you a decorator? Or like, what are you?
Especially when you have a heavy architecture background, that does cross your mind of, I guess in a way, like what other architects are going to think about it, which I don't know if we should care, but it does come up.
No, I totally agree. I mean, on the other hand, we had like Gary,
leading
the pack here for a long time. He was, I mean, he's the same thing. It was like, what, 49, 50, like, fuck it, I'm just gonna do this other thing. And then, I worked at Marxist that way back. Like, they were doing like the weird houses in Venice, or sort of like do a thing on the back of something, and it was very, fun, sculptural, like playful. So there was a lot. I mean, LA has a lot. I mean, Schindler is so great. Like, Schindler's modern master, but like not a modernist in the high modernist minimalism sense, like such a maximalist crazy person. So like, I kind of was like, how do I loosen up the I should do this, and kind of try like not live by the should statements, but I could, because I remember Gaetano Pesci had done that Shy at Day Office along with Lubavitch Lanier, and I was like, that is just too crazy. Like, it's like blobs of goo, like, now I'm kind of like, it's pretty cool. But like back in the day, you're like, what the fuck is that? So I feel like that's sort of a I always have to remember like my prejudices, even when I did this book, which I'm so happy and proud. I did the book. I had a friend of mine who is now like the head of graphic design faculty at CalArts, but he was the book designer. I was like, I don't want it to be a Swiss modernist book. I want it to be more like one of these, like at the time, like the Japanese magazines that were kind of like, everything's collaged together. But then you do you, because I know if I get too involved, like my, will take over. So they really pushed it. And I was like, layout is crazy, But now I'm like, oh yeah, that's, it was a good trend-setting thingy, but it was also like their art, as graphic designers, they were similarly able to be able to do new things in that world that were less constrained. And so I felt like it turned out really well. But, I'm very aware of the irrational brain operating over there. And sometimes you do have to use it, like, especially around budgets and stuff. Like, no, we're not going to be doing any of that. Sorry, that's not a form. But on the other hand, it isn't so great when you're trying to design something new.
Yeah. And now a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the second studio.
Spreadsheets can't bring your designs to life, but Programma can. Say hello to a bespoke integrated software suite built by and for experienced architecture and design professionals. Use your Pinterest image library to build collaborative mood boards, then turn them into shared online presentations with a click using Programma's pin boards. Use the Programma Web Clipper to build a centralized specification library for your studio. Share always up-to-date specifications and product schedules with clients, trades, and colleagues by generating beautiful, branded, live links, and client dashboards. Programma's clean, minimal interface allows your work to shine. Start for free and save 25% on annual plans at programma.design/second studio. In our office, we do a lot of remodel projects, and getting accurate as-built of the homes was always a challenge. As you can imagine, manually surveying a home is tedious and time-consuming. Fortunately, we discovered Canvas, an app that allows us to use our iPad or iPhone to scan entire homes quickly using LiDAR technology. Canvas processes the scan to produce 2D drawings and or 3D computer models of the home. The files are compatible with SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, and others. Learn more by clicking the link in our show notes or visiting canvas.io/SSP and get your first as-built free.
Architects and interior designers, if you're looking to elevate your workflow, then we suggest using the BIM computer program ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to 3D design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. You can start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking the link in our episode notes.
If we think about those two, let's say, approaches or ways of doing architecture as kind of being on a spectrum, and they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, let's say, and so you do that first project, and that kind of blew the doors open, and afterwards you said that came with it many things, but one of them was the mental freedom, so that the possibilities were now much greater. Was there a moment in the following projects or at whatever point in time where you viewed it as sort of a spectrum and you said, okay, I could go way far off to the left and do the, let's say, artistic approach, for lack of a better phrase. And then you felt, well, maybe there's a way, though, to find a middle ground or have these two things meet? Was it a full abandoning of all of the theory and training and approach you had before, or was there a merging of the two? Was it unconscious? Like how did that work? Because it sounds like a really different shift. And up until then, you had like a very serious background in serious theory of architecture. And I'm wondering how those two sides kind of reconcile themselves.
No, I think that I still think conceptual framework is the most important thing for your project to have any discursive possibilities. But the framework, I think the conceptual framework doesn't come with a vocabulary of architecture. I think they're separate. I think the concept of like the project I'd done right before I did that house was a house nearby in Echo Park, and this was before the shift. And it was, it had a big, I was already learning how to use storefront framing at the time, which I also used on the other house, but this sort of storefront of glass that went in a continuous strip through the whole house, and you could see insulation, plumbing, framing, windows, insulation, and that I really thought of it as this, like I call it the show house. So it was like, like an agricultural college when they cut a hole in the side of a cow with the plastic, you can see how the digestion works or something. Like it was sort of
right.
Literally, it was like ornament of showing the guts of Type 5 construction. Like that was kind of what I was interested in. But the rest of the building, which I still think is a good building, but it was very minimal. It was like hardy panel kind of. I would say to me that the framework I can always use as a simple rationalist framework is kind of more like, let's say, case study modernism, like very simple shed roof, like you can always use that as a blank if you need to,
right.
But the idea wasn't that. The idea was about this sort of glass and windows used to expose everything. So that I still do that a lot. I just don't have to be in a minimalist vocabulary of architecture to do it.
Yeah.
So it's not that. It's more like I just opened the door all this other stuff that I liked, maybe on a painterly way and sculptural way, but I didn't give up the core. Like I just don't like projects that don't have a conceptual. Like that's why the interior stuff is sometimes tricky for me. You go somewhere and I'm like, oh yeah, this is all just based on, I don't know, some aesthetic from whatever period, like bunk in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is the why? It looks cool. Like what's the grounding concept? Like I need the intellectual thing, because I think it does provide you, like, you make interesting choices if you have a conceptual underpinning.
Yeah.
And and you can also, like, to me, the big thing is also that the result, that the thing that you make is going to be interpreted differently by different people, but is open to being interpreted by different people. Like it's not a one-off, like so-and-so might experience this as a playful, someone else might see it as, a poem-y thing about whatever, just that like, I think the thing we did last year is we did a show for LACMA about Scandinavian modernism.
Yeah.
Yep.
Scandinavian modernism in America. And I got to use my whole arsenal of like stuff from the 70s when I was a kid, when Scandinavian modernism was being imported to America, and my mom being a buyer of that as a German lady that emigrated. I grew up with a lot of that, but also, all of my interests in like Deborah Sussman and the LA Olympics and like just all this, like they were pretty open to us doing a maximalist thing. And partially because when you're doing a museum show, especially one that involves architecture design, the objects and the stuff are just tiny. Like it's here's a vase, here's a something, and they're not able, even though they themselves as objects, if you actually look at it and read about it, has all this stuff going on, they don't visually have a lot of impact. And so a lot of those shows I think can be incredibly dry. And so civilians, architects or art historians might be all into it, but like your average person that's taking a tour of this thing is just like, okay, a bunch of vases, whatever.
Yeah.
So to try and tell the story, like unlock the story of all these things, and like that was really the fun part of that. Like we could really like blow up their stories in a way that became this bigger environment. It's very colorful, color coding that's taken from the object. So I felt like that was a really successful way of doing that kind of thing, like using all these other techniques to tell a much bigger cultural story without taking away, I think, from the objects themselves or the tapestries on the wall or whatever. But and also telling the story of some of the influences on like Alto and the other designers from Europe, like Saarinen. I got really into the elder Saarinen. Uriel Saarinen is my hero right now. He was the founder of Cranbrook School of Art and stuff, which I still haven't been to, but I think if I go there, I'll never want to leave. So I'm wary.
So you have to be careful with that one.
Going there, yeah.
Yeah, we had attended the LACMA show. It was super well done.
Yeah.
And your description of the reasoning behind it makes total sense. That I think it executed it in that way.
It was very
precisely
cohesive with the artwork that was exhibited. It was very nice.
I like your description of the kind of approach to projects and thinking about it as there's a sort of a framework layer to it, and then there's other layers to a project. And as you were talking, I was thinking, sometimes I visit projects that are done by a person who doesn't have an architecture background. And let me preface by saying, I don't think you have to have an architectural education and background to do good architecture. That's not the case. But 95% of the time, that is the case. So when I see projects, I think sort of like the interiors you were describing, who are done by like architecture projects that have to do with space and scale and all the stuff, that are done by someone who doesn't have that background, and they have just a natural gift for composition and color and things like this. I probably feel the same way you do. When I'm in the space, I just feel that there's that other layer of thought that doesn't exist. And I find it deeply disturbing personally, because it's just not enough. And I do think that objectively it's not that framework kind of conceptual layer, however you would describe it, that comes maybe from the architectural thinking. I don't think it's just, how do I say it? I don't think it's just important to architects. I think it's objectively important to the work itself. I think it does bring something, some deeper meaning to it, even if it's not a visible thing, even if the language of the project is very diverse, but that conceptual framework is solid. I don't know. I really like that description that you made, because I also find on the opposite end that architects tend to have that framework, but then be super restrained with the execution of it on the other side. And a lot of
architects are like just awful interior designers, like it's like how many Vasily chairs could you possibly stand to see in the world? I mean, I think it's because that's a more overtly playful realm. I mean, I would just say like I've worked with so many incredible interior designers, and I think of it a little bit as like landscape. Like I'm not, or like we do actually have some great landscape people in my office, so we do it sometimes, but I love going to landscape architecture sites, in Europe and stuff like that. I just love historic gardens and stuff because of like the visual effects and all the perspectival stuff. And there's so many the idea of the grotto, the picturesque, like all that stuff that we can't really do picturesque that much, because we're modernists, but like they can. So I love that. I love like doing a modern house and having like a very romantic, like neo-industrial garden outside of it. Because I think that's, as opposed to like whatever, lines and planes garden or something.
Yeah.
And I think that interiors work the same way. Like I prefer to have the architecture part of it, and then it's actually kind of nice often to have an interiors person doing their own story in it, because it kind of shows that this space and light and materiality world that we've made then can have something else. On the other hand, we do a lot of interiors here in my office. Sometimes residential, mostly in this larger sense, like when we do big, like we did, we've done some Nike headquarters, done like these big headquarters, and we're essentially doing like interior urbanism and making special places in it. Like we do, cafes and libraries and other places to work within space, or like doing like Ashes and Diamonds. We did this winery up in Napa that's sort of about mid-century modernism. Like it's about the California, because everything's a theme, in Napa Valley. So we're like, okay, our theme is going to be modernist architecture in California because it coincides with the birth of the wine industry. Like the California wine business is a post-war industry, and we're like, let's do post-war as our winery. We'll do a post-war winery. So I had been doing this show in Palm Springs about Albert Frey and Lena Bobardi at the time. So I was like, let's use like some of these languages and just supersize them in a overtly Venturi-esque way, like Frey windows and Wexler roofs, and just make that. Those are like the bigger elements. But then, when we did the furniture on the inside, we kind of did, California, like themes and like whatnot on the inside, just because it's a theme, I used to be I have a love-hate thing with themed environments. I don't really like them, but I now in my dotage, like, actually there's a lot of interesting stuff about that. Like I love Tivoli Gardens, stuff like that. So I'm kind of more into it now. But and I do, retail concepts, and those are sometimes creating a theme. So I guess I feel like it's a different layer. We're not supposed to be good at interiors as architects necessarily, because it's, to the extent it's, it used to be a playground of the rich expressing different things, like we're working at Silence and Rancho Mirage, and that's this famous Billy, oh my gosh, there's a big show about it right now at the Museum of Silence, but Bill Haynes is the interior designer, and that was this thing that was really big in the 60s. And I mean, he's quite a remarkable person, but it's kind of making his own furniture that's sort of, some of it's like French 19th century, but these big colors and patterns that you kind of recognize them like in 60s clothing and stuff too. Like it's part of a larger idea about the world, and like, the yellow drapes match the bedspread, but it's got this embroidered thing, these techniques from the 19th century. So it's a sort of whole other thing that is in, like in museums, it's in the decorative arts department, not the architecture department, although often they're merged. Like a lot of museums have the design department, and architecture, decorative arts are both in one world. Like silverware is in there too. That part of, I think that a lot of us in America, American architecture maybe gave up a lot of that spectrum a long time ago, even though in the beginning of the 20th century, architects were designing the silverware and the glassware and the tapestries and, like the Albers family and all this stuff. So I kind of think it's not a bad thing to look at, getting into that territory. I think it's very fruitful to I really think textiles are interesting, and, but it's training you'd have to do on your own nowadays, through working on it. So I think with all the digital tools that we have now, I think there'll probably be some interesting stuff coming out of architecture world, because you could you can probably 3D print pretty amazing wall hangings if you wanted to for your space, and go back to the idea of, Adam's house in paradise made out of fabric walls and stick roof or something like that. It'd be kind of interesting to see what that looks like in 2035 or something.
I agree. It's an interesting point. I mean, for sure, at least in my experience in the educational settings, that's all, that layer of stuff is not talked about. And I wish it would be, but also at the same time, my feeling of what I experienced was there's just so much already to learn And because, folks maybe not know, but if you're usually when you're studying architecture, you study building stuff, yes, but you study cities also. And that's a whole nother life of multiple lives of knowledge. So it's really hard to go from like all these scales and, 5 or 6 or 7 years of whatever, of education, let's say. But I agree. I mean, I think having a wider palette to work with, like, why not? And I do find that the best landscape practices and spaces and the best interior practices and spaces do have a strong foundation to them. It's not just all, it'll just make it look pretty. That's when things start to get strange. And I think that's also why a lot of architects tend to reject that, because that's what happens most often, especially in the interiors. But that's not always the case, and it certainly doesn't have to be that way.
No, but I think
and it's probably more trend and consumer driven, like
for sure.
I mean, right now it would be like stuff people saw on Instagram or something, right? Like, oh, pink arches everywhere. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that I like it. I like it a little bit. I like the Spanish architect Bofield, but like, I'm like, I don't know if I want to see it everywhere.
Yeah. Do you have to live and die by it for the next year because it's the trend of the year? I don't know. I don't know if we have to do that. Yeah. So that's a very interesting kind of spectrum of things that you do. I want to ask also, you do a lot of different types of projects, which is also really cool. I mean, on paper and the work itself and what you do is actually quite much more eclectic than an average architect who's doing whatever they do. Is it, as a relatively small-ish practice, difficult to do a lot of different types of projects? Are you having to partner with other offices very often? Like, how does that work?
We don't really, we're not that small. We're like almost 30 people actually. So we don't really partner with other people anymore unless it's like an AOR or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think we've just different people have, like, there's a couple of people who are really interested in and good at graphics. There's I guess I would say that it's a little, I mean, just even per the last idea, like from cities to, doorknobs, that Eliel Saarinen did all that, like Finland, like designed cities and started Cranbrook but partially because it's a community effort too, right? So there's like 3 weavers in the hangout, and there's, other architects and people who that you do need a larger community, I think, to produce things. And sometimes some of it's makers, like the makers thing is actually a really big deal, and also more possible these days, I feel like, than probably since the post-war era, like where there's just people who can, and especially in a city like this, you can it's pretty easy to find someone who can make you a custom stainless steel curved island thing with touch button, like I did that for like Silvertop with Elon Day and Venice, or just there's people out there who can do stuff. So you have more opportunity to find collaborators. But I would say the scale, I guess I just think I'm very paranoid of either getting bored or repetitious.
Yeah.
And so even though I would say there's probably is some bigger common threads that do tie the projects together, and they're not like so different from each other that, it's like Sybil, like multi-personality syndrome or something.
Yeah.
But I just think I really, some friends of mine that are like more my age were like trying to still be like the generalist architect, where the mindset that you are trained in as an architect, including everything from like, what's the framework, what's the concept, but also like, what are the real issues of site and, topography that we have to deal with, and everything in between. And it's really great to know all those things and not be overly specialized in one thing, because then I think it just gets repetitious very quickly.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, some projects we do, we'll have the one house we were working on that's a Foster Road to Jackson, wild, like 9,000 square foot thing in out near Pomona, and it's been under construction for 5 years. I'm using the same contractor I used for Silvertop, but a lot of it was already fallen apart. So we've been rebuilding things, and we've been building new things, and it's kind of this ongoing dialogue. And So something like that might go on for 5 years, whereas you might have another project that, is trying to get from someone buying a house and like starting construction and doing mini permits and trying to get them moved in by September, like so a 9-monther, from soup to nuts or something. So those rely, you really have to know what, like, the person's working on it. It's better if they know everything about a lot of things in order to make those work. And so yeah, so trying to train everyone who's here in different fields, also like TI jobs, like the Nike stuff with Snapchat and Beats, like those are very fast, very intense, crazy detailed drawings. The construction process is so different because anything you don't draw becomes a change order and costs a huge amount of money. And so you have to draw every single thing in advance. Whereas in residential, if you draw every single thing in advance, it's all going to change later anyhow. And then you're going to be stuck like having to redraw it 10 more times. So you don't draw as much, but you have to be on top of it. So just learning the modalities, I think it's just really good for just even the continuing education of ourselves as architects, that you try different things. I met a woman, I did this thing the other day that was, we belong to SoCal NOMA, National Organization of Minority Architects, and they were doing portfolio reviews for students. So a bunch of students from LA and some people came down from San Luis Obispo, and there's a bunch of different architects there, like, us professionals. I was one of them, to like sit down with students, talk about their portfolio. So this woman, my cohort that I was looking at stuff with is someone who works for a really big firm, and she's probably my age, really great. But she was telling the students how in a really big office, similarly, she got really good at, elementary schools, but then after a while she's like, all right, I'm gonna not do the elementary school anymore. I'm gonna learn some new stuff, and I'm gonna do like a stadium, or I'm gonna do a housing project or something, and would just kind of move herself around. And then every once in a while, they'd be like, oh God, we need someone to do the school right now for this. And you're the expert, and she would do it. But like, she wasn't, you don't want to get stuck in this thing. Otherwise, suddenly it's a day job. And then if you're going to have a day job, why be an architect? Like, you might as well work in a hedge fund or something, right? I mean, that'd be stupid. So just to kind of keep your mind going, and excitement about learning. It's fun to, I mean, I actually like waterproofing, I don't have much I want to do with it, but I like the responsibility that comes with being an architect. Like I like to take responsibility for stuff, probably, in too much of a way. So, but I just like knowing stuff, it's fun.
I think that's a classic, one of the reasons why it's so fun and interesting and great to be an architect, and why architects love what they do, but it's also challenging to practice, but also maybe even challenging to describe to other people what it is you do, because you just love. Like, I was recently taking a personality test of some kind for some reason. I was asking all these questions, and I just found myself in every question thinking both. Like, what is this? Why do I have to choose between, macro and micro, or whatever it was? There's actually just two final questions. The first one was, is there a type of project that you haven't done yet, but you would really, really like to do?
I was going to ask that.
Okay, well, I stole your question.
I'd love to do, well, I guess a library would be my dream. Ooh. And I like the way that libraries have changed so much, but particularly library in a school.
But like, in a school?
Yeah, like but yeah, a big project for me that has been influential, we're working on the synagogue, and that's kind of like the model I'm using for the synagogue, is the Bibliothèque Saint-Geneviève in Paris. That is Labrouste from, 1880s or something, but it was like the first public library, basically. And it's, you go upstairs, and it's a big open public hall for students, so it's open all hours. So, I guess I'm really interested in communities, and like, how does the architecture help build community? So whether it's housing, or we're doing a community center for some everything, and to do that, to be a good community space, you actually have to offer something, spatially, and how do you relate to the street and stuff like that. But I also think that the act of reading or studying, whether it's on a computer or on your phone, I think that that's a kind of a sacred pastime that I'm really interested in, almost as spiritual practice / practical, and just the idea of quietness and, a space that's more meditative. Because a lot of stuff I do is more actiony and have a conversation here and just sort of how do you sort of do that in a way that's um, you can either look inward or read and educate yourself. I think that's really exciting. And I just love, like, I mean, one of my favorite building types historically is the Athenaeum, the early libraries in America that are, just the smell of books I really like. And even though left aren't as books oriented, I was even though they're publishing more books, so I don't know how books oriented people are, but I kind of read half on a Kindle these days too. So, but I just think that there's a lot of stuff about that, and I have to say, like, it's maybe a throwback to my childhood. My dad is a bit of a hoarder of books. I mean, I think downstairs our basement had like 1 million books, and he still has 1 million. That's the whole thing right now to have to deal with. But I just like. I still like if I read about a book that sounds interesting, I'll buy it. Even if I'm going to read it on my Kindle, I just like want to have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyhow, so there's a big yen. But I'd always wanted to do a school, and I think, but really the part of the school I most want to do is the library.
Yeah. Cool. Did you ever get to design a library as a student project? Because I feel like it's a pretty common one because there's a lot of cool stuff to work with. I taught it. Oh, you taught it?
We go.
Nice.
But the best one, I think the best last teaching one I did that I really liked, and someone did it as a thesis that I really liked of mine, was the 24-hour spa, like not spa in a fancy pants way, but like Korean spa in LA kind of thing, like an urban space that like We Spa type of thing. I think that's a really interesting program that you can use. You can go all the way back to like Hadrian and forward to Seoul, 2025. Like it has just this bunch of stuff about the body and the gender communing, and like it's really interesting tech. But so putting it out there. Yeah. Option studio somewhere.
Yeah. Or if anyone needs the library design, then they know who to call.
Or 24-hour spa.
But it's an interesting thing real quick. I do think that our practice, we focus pretty much on single family residences now. But our background is pretty eclectic in different types of projects. And I was remarking the other day, I do miss doing a variety of projects for many reasons, but one of them is that the questions that you get to ask when you're doing a spa or a library or a community center or whatever else is it's different, right? Because now you're thinking about publicness, privateness, the actual public, and not just 2 or 3 people living in a house that's never going to be photographed because it's private, all that kind of stuff. There's a different set of program and things you get to work with as an architect. And I do miss that.
Yeah. And you have to be like, let's see. You're pleasing an unpredictable group of people, right? Like you have to loosen the thing, like, oh, how does a kid experience this? How does a old person, like, what would be, what's going to work on those different levels? And it's really fun to think about that. I like sometimes I do like multi-generational homes. Yeah. I kind of like that because then you have a little bit of, different kinds of people's needs that make your program design a little more exciting to work with, content-wise. But I do. I mean, I love doing houses. I think that they're probably the place you can be the most creative on an actual design point of view.
Like execution level. Yeah. The final question we always ask is, what is your favorite building?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. I mean, I had a thing for a while. I'd ask everyone that was like every month. I was like, tell me your favorite building this month. That's different than last month. But so I would have to put it in the lately category because I have so many right now. I think I would. We had an office retreat last year at this place. I would call it Dusty Modernism. It's in Joshua Tree. It's I got some crazy name, like the Institute for Mental Physics, I think. But it's Lloyd Wright. It's in a state of like amazing, happy, inexpensive neglect. I was actually turned on to it a little bit by Brad Dunning, who just designed that Albert Frey show that's up right now at Palm Springs, which is really cool. But anyhow, we stayed there, and you could rent these rooms that are like triangle rooms. They're triad, so each of the buildings is 3 triangles in their rooms, and they're perfect modernist ideal rooms. Kind of scrap. People mostly use this for like if you paid to go on like a yoga retreat for 3 days, they'd kind of like
Right.
house everybody and do all this stuff there. And it's got this cafeteria that's like vegan and it's an amazing space. It looks like Nepenthe kind of in Big Sur, but like again, super dusty and not in like I'm hoping nobody just takes it over and turns it into like the standard job
Right.
but it would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
perfect for like, a fabulous resort because it's just building is so great. This landscape is really interesting. And there's something about though the layer of its being a little bit of a ruin or a kind of it was built by a utopian, maybe would be cult leadery type of person for their gatherings, and it was in the 50s, so it has that layer of California weirdness,
Yeah.
whatever it's called, and then it has the layer of Frank Lloyd Wright DNA. Like there's a lot of pieces that look like they could be straight up Taliesin, like the desert walls with the concrete and that stone. And it's in this Joshua Tree, which is such an interesting place right now. It's going through a lot of pain as it grows, post COVID. Like I think it doubled its population. Do they even have water? So it's the palimpsest stuff is what really gets me. Like I'm like, it's this layer, it's that layer, it's that layer. But you can actually go experience it and spend a weekend there with like 30 people, and it's like barely costs anything, which is almost also impossible in California these days. So I like that kind of thing. So I think that would be my favorite right now. It's a real compound. That's cool.
That's awesome.
That's a good one.
That's a great answer. Yeah. We finally got to visit Taliesin West over the summer.
Well, you did.
And it was...
Isn't that heaven? Oh my gosh.
It was so
I'm
cool.
so mad that they drove the school out. I cannot even tell you.
Yeah.
I have a whole thing about that. But yeah, I think Taliesin is really an incredible place. And the roofs are fabric.
I know. And they're trying to figure out what to replace it with to keep it honest, but durable. And the story behind Taliesin
lasted 100 years. I mean, or 80 years. But yeah,
it's remarkable.
Yeah, that's an incredible place. I think Wright is a really such an interesting, important character. I mean, not in the civilian.
But
like the DNA. I mean, just the Schindler aspect. The creativity is incredible.
I think he might have been an alien.
Marina thinks he was an alien.
Seriously, I mean, you see
just
what
pumps
he came
out the
up
work.
with at the time he came up with it. It's just
at the time too. We always remark that it's easy to forget how long ago he existed. That was like a while ago.
And his sweat. I just went into the waste space for about. Can you still hear me on my way?
Yeah, you're good. Well, perfect timing.
Perfect timing. But yes, that was probably the alien popping it out. Don't talk about me that way. But yeah, what an ego, though. I mean, that's the one good thing about architecture. I think like that era of the just monster egos is kind of hopefully
fading away,
slowly going out with the tides. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
I think so.
Well, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us. This was a great way to begin a Friday to close out the week. This was a lot of fun. I hope we continue the conversation.
Same here. I really appreciate you guys spending the time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support us, then please leave us a review in the Apple Podcasts app, Spotify, YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that stuff.
You can also wire us $1 million anytime. Just let me know.
You can find us on Instagram. Follow us on there for quotes, reels, comments, what else? Guest work images, announcements.
Debates,
whatever else. Things we have going on. We have a hotline, which is 213-222-6950. So if you have questions or guest suggestions or just thoughts and you want to put them out there, feel free to text it or you can leave a voicemail. What else is there? We have the merch store. So you should
get your stickers.
It mainly exists because we came up with this idea to print and sell stickers. And the stickers are not stickers which say the Second Studio Podcast, as one might expect. They have no information on the stickers that have anything to do with our show, actually, or anything to do with the branding of the show. There's a red sticker and a green sticker, and the red sticker says, in large font, "This is bad architecture." And the green sticker says, "This is good architecture." And
so if there is a great building near you, or the most awful building near you, and you want the world to know,
yes,
get your stickers.
You could get the sticker, and you could, in theory, stick it on the face of a building that deserves
Or
be
the face
labeled
of the
such
person who owns the building.
as bad architecture. Anyway, so we have that. We have other things. A lot of more, good guests, good topics,
A lot
good
of
things.
things coming up. Yeah, we're busy people. Busy.
People. But we do appreciate you guys listening, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, bye.